This is an unspeakable tragedy in our state that has federal involvement because the investigations will occur jointly with the Coast Guard and the NTSB. I would echo many of the remarks that my colleague made. I particularly was struck when I was there. The Highway Patrol divers had just finished their work, and they had the worst job maybe in the country last Friday, but certainly in Missouri. Their job was to go to the bottom of the lake and find the bodies that had been trapped in this amphibious vehicle at the bottom of one of the most beautiful lakes in the world. And you never want a tragedy like this to strike in your state. I will tell you that the only silver lining I can find is that it happened in a part of our state where there's a great deal of love, a lot of openness in Branson, Missouri for the travelers that come through, for all the tourists that come to Branson. We're very proud of that area of our state. The Ozarks has some of the most beautiful terrain God has created, and these lakes that we have both in the central part of our state and in the southwest part of our state, we're very proud of. They turned ugly and deadly last Thursday, and we had a tremendous loss of life. This investigation will take a year or more. I join my colleague in urging the Senate to approve these two nominees that have been pending for too long. It is my understanding we've gotten movement on that today. Sad that it would take a tragedy like this to get this thing moving, but I believe by the end of the day, I'm at least optimistic at this point. I don't know what my colleague, Senator Blunt, has learned, but I've learned that it appears that these nominees will be approved by the end of the day. And there were incredibly difficult weather conditions, but there's inherent dangers in these amphibious vehicles, and we know this. How do we know this? Because it's been investigated before. We've had 40 deaths associated with the duck boats since 1999, yet there has been little done to address the inherent dangers of these amphibious vehicles. We had 13 deaths in Arkansas, in Lake Hamilton in 1999, 4 deaths in the Ottawa River, in Ontario, Canada in 2002, 2 in the Delaware River, in Philadelphia in 2010, and then of the 17 deaths that occurred last week. And additionally, we had 5 deaths when the vehicle collided, had a on-land collision in Seattle in 2015. Back when the NTSB investigated the incident in Arkansas, which is about 200 miles south of Branson, they found contributing factors to that accident to be the lack of adequate buoyancy that would have allowed the vehicle to remain afloat in a flooded condition, the lack of adequate oversight by the Coast Guard, and importantly also the canopy. When these vehicles are on water, the canopy serves as a trap if they take on water and are sinking. People who are trying to get out have no easy way to escape this sinking vehicle because the canopy traps them within the vehicle. It also is a problem in terms of wearing life jackets, because if someone has a life jacket on and one of these vehicles goes down in the water, they get trapped against the roof even more because the buoyancy of the life jacket holds them against the roof and makes it even more difficult for them to get to some point of ingress or egress. These are not open vehicles. When they're in the water, it's almost like an enclosed bus. It's almost like, imagine if you're on an airplane in the water or on a bus in the water. It is not a boat, it's a vehicle. And so the NTSB recommendations were pretty straightforward. Unfortunately, nothing happened as a result of those recommendations. I'm in the early stages of drafting legislation with input from the NTSB and the Coast Guard to require that the design issues with these passenger vessels be addressed, and that the boats that are not compliant be taken out of service until they can be compliant. We think that their past recommendations are reasonable and common sense. We really think that the biggest problem that has to be addressed is this reserve buoyancy that has been pointed out in the past as part of the significant problem. And if they can't do the buoyancy in a really timely basis, at a minimum remove the canopies if they're going on the water. So there is an opportunity for people to escape what is a sinking coffin, which was a sinking coffin for way too many people last Thursday. As always, I want this to be done in a way that makes sense, but I don't think it makes sense for us to wait another year to address some of these glaring issues in terms of passenger safety. I also would like a moment just to recognize the victims in this tragedy. We had 5 victims that were from Missouri. William Asher, 69, and Rosemarie Haman, 68, who both lived in St. Louis. Janice Bright, her husband William Bright, 63 and 65, from Higginsville, Missouri, closer to Kansas City. Bob Williams, the driver, not the captain of the vessel, 73 years old, who lived in Branson. From Arkansas, we had Steve Smith, who was 53, and Lance Smith, who was 15 years old. From Illinois, Leslie Dennison, who was 64 years old. And maybe the most heartbreaking, in some ways, was the large family that so many members were lost as a result of this vehicle being sinking in Table Rock Lake. Was Angela, 45, Belinda, 69, Irvin, 76, Glenn, 40, Horace, 70, and then the Coleman children. Reese, who was 9, Evan, who was 7, Maxwell, who was 2, and Arya, who was only a year old. We mourn their deaths, and I do think this is a situation where you do feel helpless. On the other hand, I do think there are some steps we can take so that these particular amphibious vehicles are addressed in terms of passenger safety, so that there is never again a feeling of helplessness when one of these boats finds themselves in a situation where it's taking on water, but the people in the vehicle cannot get out of the vehicle in order to save themselves, and can't even avail themselves of life preservers in a way that would protect them if, for any reason, they were not capable swimmers. I'm very proud of both NTSB and Coast Guard were working well together when I was down there. Mayor Best was doing a terrific job. The Red Cross was there in full display in terms of providing services. The people of Branson were in the midst of an outpouring of love and affection and respect and sympathy. And the entire state, our governor has done a good job. It is, frankly, it's the silly season for me. This is the time when it's relatively few weeks until an election, and the fur is flying and the politics go back and forth. It was like an oasis on Friday in terms of everyone coming together, sitting their politics on the side of the road, trying to work together to find answers to these difficult questions, come together as we should, and find a way to protect the traveling public and the people. And the saddest thing about this is the people who went on this vehicle were doing it because they were there having a great time. And that is probably a cruel irony of this situation. They weren't taking a bus on the way to work. They weren't taking a plane on a business trip. They were enjoying a beautiful location with their family in the middle of what should be a carefree moment. And it turned deadly and tragic. And we do need to come together and try to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. And so with a respectful nod to all the first responders and the people of the Branson community that have been so supportive, I yield the floor.